Daniel Lewis had spent years climbing the ladder in his law career, and when he finally bought a home in Willow Creek Estates, he thought he had found the perfect reward for his hard work. The gated community boasted manicured lawns, peaceful streets, and a sparkling community pool. On paper, it was everything he wanted. But Daniel soon discovered that beneath the polished surface lay a homeowners association that ruled with an iron fist. From the very first week, the HOA seemed to have him in their sights. Letters citing minor violations piled up in his mailbox. One accused him of leaving his recycling bin out for too long. Another claimed the shade of his shutters was not community compliant. Daniel brushed them off at first, confident he could navigate such nonsense. After all, he was a lawyer. He knew how to read contracts, interpret bylaws, and push back when necessary. But the HOA president, Mrs. Evelyn Grant, wasn't used to being challenged. She had run the board for years with little opposition, and Daniel's polite but firm questions about missing financial reports and questionable fees made him a target. Whispers from neighbors confirmed his suspicion. Anyone who pushed back against Mrs. Grant's authority eventually regretted it. Still, Daniel refused to back down. He began keeping records, letters, photos, and meeting notes, meticulously stored in a binder. He had a feeling he might need them. That tension came to a head one evening at a heated HOA meeting. Daniel calmly laid out discrepancies in the HOA's budget, demanding transparency. Mrs. Grant's face flushed red, her voice rising as she tried to silence him. Then, in an act that left the entire room stunned, an HOA-hired security guard tasered Daniel right there at the meeting. The room erupted in chaos, but Daniel's fight was only beginning. In the weeks leading up to that shocking meeting, the warning signs had been building. Daniel had quickly noticed that Willow Creek's HOA operated more like a private regime than a community board. Neighbors often kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact when Mrs. Grant made her daily rounds. One evening, Daniel struck up a conversation with an older neighbor, Mr. Carter, who nervously glanced over his shoulder before speaking. "You're a brave man for asking questions," he muttered. "The rest of us learned it's easier to pay whatever she demands than deal with her wrath." That was Daniel's first real glimpse of how deeply fear had settled into the community. People were intimidated into silence, accepting fines for absurd reasons, like wind chimes being too loud or garden gnomes being aesthetically disruptive. Daniel found it not only absurd, but also suspicious. Where was all that money going? He attended board meetings only to find them rushed, dismissive, and often conducted without proper documentation. When Daniel requested financial records, he was stonewalled. The HOA claimed the reports were under review or not available for public inspection. For a man who made his living by spotting legal inconsistencies, these excuses only strengthened his suspicions. Mrs. Grant seemed to take his persistence personally. The letters became more frequent, the fines steeper. Daniel even noticed a uniformed security guard begin patrolling his street more often, always slowing down in front of his house. The message was clear: back down or face consequences, but Daniel wasn't wired to retreat. He knew harassment when he saw it, and he wasn't about to let a power-hungry HOA president bully him into silence. So he doubled down, organizing his binder of evidence and preparing for what he suspected would be a battle in court. What he didn't realize was that the HOA wasn't going to wait for court. They were planning to break him first. It all came to a head late one Friday evening. Daniel had just returned home from his law office when he noticed a folded piece of paper taped to his front door. The letter was bold, stamped with the HOA's seal, and carried a threat in all caps. Final notice. Failure to pay will result in escalated action. His jaw tightened. This wasn't just a fine, it was intimidation. As he stepped inside, his phone buzzed with a call from a neighbor. "Daniel, watch yourself," the voice whispered. "I saw the HOA's new security guy lurking by your driveway tonight. He doesn't look like he's here to keep the peace." Daniel's instincts flared. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911, determined to have a record of what was happening. He explained calmly to the dispatcher that he was being harassed by a homeowners association and wanted officers on site to document the escalating situation. The dispatcher assured him a patrol unit was on the way. But before the flashing lights of a squad car could appear, the HOA's so-called security guard stormed onto his property. The man barked orders demanding Daniel comply with HOA fines and mocking him for calling the real police. Daniel stood tall on his porch, phone still to his ear. "I'm on with emergency services," he warned. "Leave my property immediately. This is a civil matter, and you have no authority here." The guard's response was shocking. Instead of de-escalating, he drew a taser from his belt and, in one swift motion, fired it at Daniel. The crackle of electricity filled the night as Daniel collapsed onto his porch, phone still in hand. On the other end of the 911 call, the dispatcher heard the chaos. "Units, move faster!" the voice urged over the radio. By the time neighbors rushed outside, gasping and recording the scene with their phones, Daniel lay stunned but conscious. He had called for help, but what happened next would shake the entire HOA to its core. When the patrol cars finally arrived, their red and blue lights flashing across the quiet neighborhood, they were met with an unbelievable sight. Daniel still on the ground, clutching his chest, and the HOA's so-called security officer standing over him with a taser in hand. The first officer out of the cruiser shouted, "Drop it! Now!" The guard froze, stammering excuses, but the taser was quickly kicked aside, and the man was detained. The crowd of neighbors that had gathered began yelling, some in outrage, others in disbelief. Cameras were recording from every angle, documenting the abuse of power. Daniel was helped to his feet by paramedics. Though shaken and bruised from the shock, his voice was steady as he pointed directly at the guard. "That man assaulted me during a lawful 911 call. He acted as if the HOA gave him authority greater than the law. He needs to be charged," the officers nodded gravely. What made the situation worse was the HOA president herself storming into the scene moments later. Furious that police were interfering with private enforcement, she accused Daniel of fabricating the assault, demanding his arrest instead. But the evidence was undeniable. Multiple witnesses spoke up at once, and half a dozen cell phone videos showed exactly what had happened. One neighbor even shouted, "We told you this HOA was out of control. This proves it." The lead officer calmly turned to the HOA president. "Ma'am, this isn't private enforcement. This is aggravated assault during an emergency call. And if the HOA hired him without proper licensing, you may be looking at liability far beyond tonight." Daniel realized in that moment he wasn't just a victim. He had the legal knowledge and community support to turn this into something much bigger. The HOA had crossed a line so bold, so reckless, that the fallout would reach far beyond their gated community, and Daniel was prepared to lead the charge. By Monday morning, Daniel had already begun the process of filing both criminal complaints and civil claims. As a seasoned lawyer, he knew how to frame the case. The assault during a 911 call was not just a local offense, it carried federal implications. Interfering with an emergency line and attacking someone while they were actively engaged with dispatch crossed into serious territory. The HOA board scrambled in panic. Their security officer had already been charged with aggravated assault and unlawful use of force. Now Daniel was targeting the association itself. He uncovered documents showing they had contracted the man without verifying licenses or background checks. Worse, internal emails leaked by a disgruntled board member revealed that the HOA president had instructed the guard to make an example of Daniel if he didn't pay fines. That phrase became the nail in the coffin. Within days, Daniel's legal filing made headlines in the local news. "Lawyer tasered by HOA security during 911 call, federal case pending." Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, interviewing witnesses and replaying the cell phone footage that neighbors had uploaded online. Public opinion turned quickly against the HOA, and residents began demanding resignations. Meanwhile, Daniel filed a federal civil rights lawsuit citing unlawful assault, negligence, and emotional distress. His claim? $5 million in damages. The figure sent shockwaves through the community, but it was carefully calculated. It not only covered medical treatment, lost work, and emotional harm, but also punitive damages designed to send a message to HOAs everywhere that abuse of power has consequences. At a press conference, Daniel stood tall, his voice calm but firm. This isn't about one man with a taser. This is about accountability. When an HOA believes it can operate above the law, people's lives are put at risk. That ends now. The story was no longer just neighborhood gossip. It had become a battle that could change how HOAs across the state operated, and Daniel had every intention of seeing it through to the end. The lawsuit didn't just rattle the neighborhood, it shook the entire city. News outlets ran nightly updates, showing the footage of Daniel being tasered while on the phone with 911. Commentators called it a textbook example of civil rights violations. Federal investigators quickly took interest. The Department of Justice opened an inquiry into whether the HOA's actions constituted interference with emergency services, which is a federal offense. The FBI interviewed Daniel as well as several neighbors to build a case. The leaked emails from the HOA board instructing their security officer to intimidate him only strengthened the investigation. Meanwhile, the HOA president tried to spin the narrative. She held a press conference claiming Daniel was milking the system for personal gain. But her defiance backfired spectacularly. During the broadcast, one reporter bluntly asked, "If your HOA has nothing to hide, why did your officer attack a man mid-911 call? And why are residents resigning from the board in droves?" The president had no answer. As pressure mounted, the federal prosecutors filed formal charges: obstruction of justice, assault under color of authority, and conspiracy. The HOA board members who approved the security measures faced subpoenas. The so-called guard was indicted on multiple counts, including aggravated assault and impersonating an officer. Inside the courthouse, Daniel's presence was commanding. He wasn't just the victim. He was a skilled attorney who knew how to dismantle the opposition. His opening statement echoed in the packed room. "The law is not a tool for intimidation. It is a shield for the people. Tonight, my neighbors watched a shield get trampled. This case will restore it." The jury leaned forward, captivated. Across the aisle, the HOA's lawyers shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were cornered. The case had evolved from a neighborhood dispute into a federal showdown, and the verdict was poised to make history. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreperson stood, holding the slip of paper that would seal the HOA's fate. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The HOA's hired guard was convicted on multiple counts, including aggravated assault and obstruction of justice. The board members who had conspired with him were found liable for negligence and conspiracy, and the president herself was forced to resign on the spot. The federal judge then turned to Daniel's civil lawsuit, awarding him $5 million in damages, a sum that would bankrupt the association and serve as a warning to every HOA that abuse of power carries consequences. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Daniel addressed the press. His words were steady, but his message carried the weight of victory. This case was never about money. It was about safety, justice, and the rights of every homeowner. HOAs are supposed to serve communities, not terrorize them. Tonight, we proved that no one is above the law. Neighbors cheered as his statement aired on evening news. Many who once feared the HOA's tactics now felt emboldened to stand up for themselves. Across the state, other homeowners began filing their own complaints and lawsuits against abusive HOAs, inspired by Daniel's stand. As for Daniel, he returned to his home with a quiet sense of peace. The ordeal had tested him, but it had also revealed the strength of community when people refused to stay silent. Looking out at his neighborhood, he knew the fight had left a lasting legacy. And so the story closed, not with bitterness, but with resolve. Abuse of authority may rise, but it will always fall in the face of truth and courage. After all, what good is a community if it forgets who it was meant to serve?